I'm Elvis Wilson, and welcome to Page to Screen, where we explore the art and craft of screenwriting and filmmaking. Joining us this time is screenwriter, author, and instructor Rick Reichman. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me here. Thank you. Rick,
why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself. What is the Rick Reichman backstory?
Well, I grew up here, and I had always had an interest in theater, but I never knew that you could actually, do something with film. And after teaching a while, I decided to apply for the writing program at the University of Southern California. And I got in. That's another story, which I won't go into the whole thing. But there was this very gorgeous woman who said, "You ought to do the screenwriting." And of course, yeah, okay. And it really worked for me. There was a teacher there named Jim Boyle who just was very, well, he was from West Point. I mean, he was West Point. And everything was by the book for him. But see, I didn't know anything about screenwriting, so everything he taught me worked. It was great. I didn't know a thing. And I went through that program. I got a graduate degree. And I came back here and found an opening at Tennessee State downtown. And I started teaching there. And I had some great students. Oh, my gosh. Well, of course, Steve Womack was one. Amy Moreland was another one who went on to write for Roseanne. And there were others some who actually wrote books or, did short stories, plays, all kinds of things, music videos, memoirs. And a lot of them told me because of what they learned in my class. So screenwriting can be, for the screen, but it can also be for a lot of other kinds of writing. I mean, when John Grisham writes, he says, I always think of it as a movie. So, screenwriting crosses boundaries. And then I got this job at Georgetown. And as I was telling you, I was taking this guy's place, and there I am standing in line, and I woke up to him. And I say, "I'm Rick Reichman," and he says, "I'm Joel Coyne." Okay. And my brother and I are going to do movies, and that's why I'm leaving. And I go, all right, good luck. Wow. I had no idea who this guy was.
That's amazing.
Isn't it? And so I taught at Georgetown for several years. And then we decided to, unfortunately, we decided to leave, which we shouldn't have, but we did. And we went out to Santa Fe, and I taught out there for several years and did various writers' conferences conferences. I did conferences in Maryland and Virginia and North Carolina and some in Montana, Arizona, Colorado, all over L.A., Hawaii even.
How did people discover that you were such a good screenwriting instructor, teacher, professor?
Know. I had
Word must have gotten
when I
out,
was in Washington, I had several articles published in both the Post and other local newspapers, which they had in those days, and I taught at the University of Virginia once, and several people heard about it, and that got me jobs. So I guess it was word of mouth.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have the internet at that time, and but people came to my seminars, and then, for instance, they invited me to Montana because somebody had been in a seminar of mine, and she said, "Hell, he's really good," So that was 2 years in Montana. Same with Jacksonville, Florida. I had a couple there, so yeah.
Do you think being a instructor, teacher, professor of screenwriting makes you a better writer yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I tell my students, and I'm really serious about this, I learn as much from them as I teach them. Every time I teach a class. In fact, going over the material that I was going over today for this, I learned a few things that I hadn't even thought about before. And so you're always learning things. So yes, very definitely helps me.
What would you recommend, or how would you inspire some of the younger writers, or even aged writers like myself? What's the first fundamental step in becoming a good screenwriter? Is it learning structure? Is it being, breaking story? What gets you started?
Because my books are, one of my books is a structure, the other's formatting. I go with structure, but you have to. I mean, yeah, you want to present a good. I mean, you want a good story. You know, they'll tell you about plot and they'll tell you about character and all of that, but it really boils down to story. And Richard Walter, who's an acquaintance of mine, who was the guru at UCLA, and I mean, you could look at every summer film for the last 20 years, and you know, his students wrote 8 of the top 10 of them. He said the same thing. It's story, and plot and all of that, and so that's what I learned at USC, and that's kind of what I teach.
So, do you have a favorite screenplay?
Oh, many, many. It just sort of depends on my mood, but you know, it's interesting. Some screenplays aren't as good as the movie. For instance, Winter's Bone, which is one of my favorite movies.
Good movie.
It's a great movie. Terrible screenplay.
Yeah.
E.T., terrible screenplay.
Yeah.
But, lovely movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, my favorite screenplays obviously, would be something like Casablanca or Chinatown. One that was written by a local writer here, the Dead Poets Society, of course, is a brilliant, wonderful screenplay.
Right on.
And there's others. I mean, I just, one of my favorite, actually, and it sounds like it's sort of people might consider it a fluff piece, but it's really not, is Men in Black.
Wow.
It's just so brilliantly structured and so well done. It's just amazing that, it was looked at as lightweight, which it's not.
Yeah. It's a fantastically structured film, screenplay. It's very complicated.
Yes, it is.
Because I think they were thinking of the long 3-film arc of what they were trying to do. So you and I were talking earlier about, like for me, one of my favorite screenplays that I've written, other people not so much. They don't really care for it.
That happens.
What's the value of writing for yourself as opposed to writing for someone who's going to pay you?
Mostly when you're writing for yourself, which you mostly have to do, you're telling the story you want to tell. And so it becomes, can you keep the momentum? Can you, how do you push each day to tell this wonderful story? If you know that somebody's waiting for it, that's one thing. If you're just doing it on spec, that's a totally different, as you well know.
Cool. One last question. You've talked about writing for TV, writing features. Do you have a favorite thing, or writing specs, or being like working for a studio? What in those things have you done yourself, and what's your favorite thing to write?
The only time I worked for studios when I was a reader.
Okay.
Yeah, and I read some of the worst scripts you've ever seen in your life. And I had to, of course,
read
write
bad scripts.
Yes, read bad scripts. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because when you're a reader, that's what you're going to get a lot of.
Exactly.
And so I read some really horrible scripts. One or two were pretty good. But what we did was, I ran some writers' conferences. I ran a writers' conference, a regular writers' conference back here in the 70s, late 70s. And then I ran a screenwriting conference in Santa Fe when I lived there. And I also helped 2 other groups run their writers' conferences. So I've we got to that, and those are good if they still have them. Those are great to go to because you can meet people. And for instance, we had people coming in from studios who were there to listen to pitches and stuff like that. When you're, it's really good to have that you're telling your story, and that's the best thing.
Despite the assignment, tell your story.
Well, no, if you get an assignment, you do the assignment.
Yeah.
But if you're on spec,
okay,
you tell your story.
We have some of our members here tonight. Thank you all for being here again.
Yes, thanks.
And they're chomping at the bit to ask you some questions and pick your brain. Would you like to hear some of those
Of course,
questions?
that'd be wonderful.
All right, let's.
My name's Charlie. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Sure.
And
Enjoying it.
might be kind of an odd question, but I know that structure is so crucial. But have there ever been any successful movies that kind of threw the traditional structure out the window?
Oh, of course.
As an example, to kind of help me understand which ones break the rules?
Well, of course, every foreign film is, is pretty much not the Hollywood structure. A lot of the English-speaking films really aren't. But for American films, Napoleon Dynamite comes to mind. That guy went to BYU, and they teach a more European approach. And certainly that film was definitely that. It was like segments that are pasted together with a story sort of holding them together. Well, My Dinner with Andre,
Okay.
Obviously that was a play first.
Yeah.
And they toured the play and got the jokes in the right place and stuff like that. A lot of people who think that some movies are not structured. And they come to me and I say, oh yeah, well here's a structure, and they see it. Mm-hmm. So what appears sometimes unstructured isn't.
Because I was curious, because sometimes it feels like maybe they don't have structures.
Well, could you mention a movie that you don't think has a structure?
I came
you're
prepared.
in the same boat I am.
Similar boat.
Right.
But I know I've seen some before that I've kind of thought, oh, the structure's weird. And so I was just wondering if they actually do sometimes to make it without it, or if they just hide it better.
A lot of this stuff comes out of now film schools, of course. Uh-huh. And the film schools in USC is totally structure. That's where I went. That's totally. UCLA is sort of structure and sort of not. The what's the one, the American film, whatever it is, that one is not structured. And the ones out of New York are really more character driven. They're really more European. Mm-hmm. So if you get a student from NYU, which I think that there's been some really good movies out of there, you're getting a much more character driven kind of screenplay. So Spike Lee, for instance.
Okay.
Robert Townsend, for instance. Those kinds of things are generally more New York than, and I've heard other writers say this. In fact, I've heard Scorsese say it, and Scorsese's another one. Scorsese say this. He says, there's two kinds of film. There's West Coast and East Coast. And what he's really saying is there's plot-driven and there's character-driven. Mm. And, if you want to sell something, I think as a new writer, and you're not doing it yourself, it's probably easier to do the plot-driven. That's what Hollywood wants. Mm. Now, there's so many different platforms now that, that may be sort of dated. I don't really know.
What about movies like Memento or Pulp Fiction?
Well, but when you look at Memento or you look at Pulp Fiction, and I've read both scripts and seen both movies, they really are structured. Okay. It just feels like because they do things not linear. But linear is not necessarily unstructured. It's just a different approach.
Gotcha.
But yeah, they're structured. But I'd have to go over the whole thing to show that. But Yeah, I love Memento. That was a great film, but
Yeah, that would have been one that I would have thought of.
yeah, it's really good, but it is structured. I mean, there is, it has the 8 turning points and the 3 acts. It has the, it has scene structure. It has, just because it goes from, front to back, is still still a timeline. There's still a structure to it.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sandra. It's nice to meet you.
Good to meet you, Sandra.
My question is, as a reader, I'm sure you've had to read like a lot of scripts at one time.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just curious what you found, what you looked for as good aspects within a script, and what you look for as like bad aspects when you were going through them.
Well, it's really interesting. That's a good question. The first thing, of course, any reader looks for is it formatted correctly? And I know they're formatting programs now, but I keep telling students that even with good formatting programs, it's kind of like having a calculator. If you don't know how to add, subtract, multiply, or divide, they're not much good. So formatting, in fact, formatting has gotten a lot of my students sold, especially in the early days when we didn't have the format programs. But even today, people still look for format. And then, of course, those first, the first 10 pages. Although I don't always go with that, because I had a student once, the first 10 pages of the script were just terrible. The rest of the script was brilliant, but it was hard to get those first 10. So you kind of look at the writing. Is it leading you someplace? Are you involved with it? Do you care about the characters? And you need to right away. And there's a guy named Bill Martell, if you ever get one of his books, and he tells you 17 ways to make your care about your character right at the beginning. You put them in jeopardy. There are a lot of other things. But do you care about this character? Do you care about the situation? Are you immediately, or do you immediately want to know what's going to happen next? And you try to be open, but sometimes it's really difficult. I ran a writer's conference or contest once, and I had to read about 120 scripts. Now, some of them are the first 30 pages, but you can tell within the first 10 or so, usually, like I said, but by 30, And we got about 200 entries, and we picked out like the top 10%. And then we read the whole script. And sometimes the rest of the script wasn't quite as good as the 30, and sometimes it was better. But it is the first. But still, when you're reading it, are you interested enough to keep turning that page? Are the characters involved? Do you like the characters? Do you want to know what's going to happen next? And I don't know how else to answer it. Sometimes it's just the brilliance of the writing too. I mean, we were talking about Vince Gilligan. Boy, you read one of his scripts, it's just marvelous. It's just wonderful. I mean, the guy paints a picture, and you're just there.
Good.
That's a different kind of script from some of the others. Indiana Jones, you're right involved in at the beginning.
Thank you.
Sure.
You had mentioned that you thought story was the most important aspect of writing. However, I had been ruminating on that for a bit while you were talking about this. Okay. And my thought process has always been, it's the characters that make the story. It's the characters that drive the story. If it's a story pulling the characters along, then it's just, from what I've constantly learned, I think that's called whether it's like a situation, not really a character. I'm really not sure how to word what I'm saying.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I listen. I have. This has been a debate that's been going on since I've been teaching, and probably way before that.
It's sort of what you were saying earlier about East Coast,
Hollywood,
West Coast.
Hollywood is West Coast. Hollywood is is very story driven. Now you've got to like the characters. Look, Indiana Jones is plot driven. I mean, there's no question about it. But if you don't like Indiana Jones, if you don't like that, you're not going to like the story. I mean, you're not going to like the movie. I'm not saying you don't pay attention. Look, you pay attention to character. You build your character. You know everything about that character. I mean, it's like you grew up with that character. You know everything. You know, his or her likes, dislikes, what their favorite clothes, their favorite ball team, their favorite music, whatever it is. And you make that character come alive, but it's still Hollywood wants plot. Hollywood wants story. And, this is Screenwriting 101, at least it was at USC. Screenwriting 101, and this is what they told us, and it seems to be, I mean, I know with all the different platforms now, things have changed a little, but, the most popular films are still the plot-driven films. And so I'm not discounting what you're saying at all. I agree. You have to have characters that are interesting, that we care about, that are alive to us. But I teach structure. I emphasize structure. Let me put it that way. And my books emphasize structure.
Great.
Because that is what, again, at USC, that is exactly what we were taught. And it seems to work.
Thank you for your question,
Yeah,
Daniel.
thanks for the question. It's a good one. It's a really good one.
Those really good questions tonight.
Oh, they were.
So,
Excellent.
we're out of time. So I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to come talk to us, Rick.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah, everyone, is there...
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks. Is there... Yay, there we go.
Thanks. Wow. And that wasn't even on the applause sign.
We didn't even have to pay them. On behalf of Page to Screen and the Tennessee Screenwriting Association, you have a standing
favorite group.
invitation to come visit us anytime. We'd
I
to have
love
you.
it. Yeah, that's great.
You started the group, so how can we say no? So,
That's it.
to find out more about TSA or to become a member, visit us online at 10Screen, www.10screen.com, or check out our Facebook page. We meet online through Zoom every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central, except for the last Wednesday of the month when we meet here in the studio. Rick, do you have any final words of wisdom for us us novice screenwriters out here?
I had a student of mine who wrote me and said, I really don't have a lot of time and I just can't get it down. And I wrote her and I said, get a timer and just do 25 minutes or 20 minutes and just write those 20 minutes and just put stuff down that you want to write. And she wrote me back about 2 weeks later and said, yeah, it's working. She said, sometimes I go over that. That's fine. Just don't go under it.
Very good. That's great advice. Well, that wraps it up. I'm Elvis Wilson, and thanks for watching Page to Screen. And remember, keep writing.
My name's David Deverell, and I've been with TSA for about 12 years. I was living in LA, that's where I was from originally, is LA. Went to film school there. And I had finished writing this one particular script, and I saw that there was a contest and I saw that the Tennessee Screenwriting Association had a contest. Well, it won first place. So that was my introduction to TSA, and then I came out here to Nashville as a tourist, and it coincided with one of the meetings. So I came to the meeting and got to experience it, and I thought, well, this is really a cool group. And then eventually, when I decided to move to Nashville, you know, this was one of the reasons that I moved here. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons. And it's been great. Love it. Listening to other people's work, it's been really helpful because I learn a lot from my fellow writers. I think the feedback that I get is really helpful. I mean, sometimes someone will throw out an idea and I say, well, I didn't think about that. That's a good solution. You know, I've had a problem with this particular scene. It was, you know, maybe there was a problem with logic. Maybe the character really wouldn't do that logically, and then someone will give me some feedback and say, well, why don't you think about this approach? Writing is a very lonely job, you know. It's just you and your keyboard and your thoughts. So it's really good to be in a situation where you can share your work and bounce off ideas on your fellow writers. And it's helpful to hear what they're working on. And then it stretches your mind to have to give them some feedback as well.